That's the boss?
Yes, that's me. You're wondering how we got here. Well, we got here just a couple of days ago, when we wondered whether or not this could have been the hardest raid tier ever. You know why? Because up to that point, back to those good old days of a couple of days ago, well, only 10 guilds had defeated the fourth boss of the raid. Now, only 10 guilds defeating the fourth boss of the raid practically made it the hardest fourth boss of the raid ever since modern WoW. We can start modern WoW from like Cataclysm, even Myths actually, of Pandaria. It was very hard. The progression was very slow. We looked at the participation of Heroic Liberation of Undermine, and the play rate in there was quite high, so it's not that there were much fewer guilds competing in the raid, and that's why the kills were so low. So it was a legitimate question, right? At the time, also a few days ago, the guilds were just getting past One Arm Bandit, Liquid and Echo, and starting to progress on Maxi, and Maxi was looking very tough. So if you went by the expectation of Maxi being tough and Gallywix being even tougher, yeah, you know, it could have looked like a pretty challenging raid. However, a disaster has struck today. And the disaster is that Gallywix ended up being a PTR untested mythic raid boss which died in less than 5 hours worth of progress. It took Liquid 4 hours and 52 minutes of in-combat time with Gallywix to actually defeat the last boss of this raid tier, clocking out at a total of 100 pulls for the boss. And then Echo coming right after, gauging also some of the progression from Liquid itself. Of course, only took 48 pulls to defeat the last boss of the raid tier. Now, while the raid tier as a whole won't be that much of a clownery as we see here, because the other bosses are still somewhat challenging. They do make, overall, the raid not one of the absolute easiest raids. If you look at this is the past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half expansions, starting from Warlords. And these are the wipes per boss, and then you have the total amount of wipes, and then the amount of wipes per boss on average. So the speed of progression of the top guilds in this raid was one-shotting the first couple, taking 6 wipes to defeat the third one, Rick Reverb, and then the aforementioned hardest fourth boss ever, Styx Bank Junker, taking 116 wipes. Then off to another challenging boss, 118 wipes for Sprocket Monger Lockenstock. Meme boss in One Arm Bandit, 56 wipes. Back to the challenge of Maxi with 149, then finishing 100 wipes on Gallywix, which clocks out at a total of 547 wipes needed to clear the entire raid, which also clocks out at an average of 68 wipes per boss. Now, these averages for Liberation of Undermine are obviously nearly half as much of the wipes required of Nerobar Palace. But we do have something that has happened before. There seems to be a trend that after a very hard tier, a very easy tier follows, or sometimes the reverse. For example, look here, you had the super hard Hellfire Citadel in Warlords, and then you enter Legion and Emerald Nightmare is the easiest raid ever. You then have the hardest raid ever, Tomb of Sargeras, which is followed by Antorus, which is one of the top 5 fewest pool raids. You then have the very easy Sanctum of Domination, which is followed by the super hard Sepulcher. Super hard Sepulcher is followed by a couple of very easy raids, Volt and Aberus, then followed by a very hard raid like Amir Josil. And now you have the very hard Nerobar Palace, followed by the easy side Liberation of Undermine. Because only 547 wipes for the number 1 guild to clear this raid out of the past 8 18 raids, meaning the past 5.5 expansions, excluding the short ones, Trial of Valor and Crucible of Storms, out of 18 raids, only 7 of them were faster than Liberation of Undermine. So we're talking about Hymal, we're talking about Emerald Nightmare, we are talking about Antorus, about Battle of the Zaralor, and then Sanctum of Domination, Vault, and Aberrus. So 7 out of the last 18, which is slightly under half. So actually, overall, the raid fits an average category, a perfectly balanced and even category in terms of average wipes and in terms of average amount of total pulls, because also the average amount of wipes, 68 per boss, is also more or less in line with the average. 8 out of 18 of the last raids were less wipes per boss than Liberation of Undermine. So technically, this clowning that we see right now is not actually about the raid itself. At the end of this raid, it will be a pretty decently balanced raid. We have a problem though. The problem is that stats and numbers at hand, which will certainly be true even for the following guilds that will progress this raid, not just the top 3 right now, it's the fact that the last boss is easier than, at the very least, 100% confirmed, 3 bosses. Styx, Sprocketmonger, and Mugsy are all harder than the last boss of the raid. This is where you go back in time and start wondering what the hell, when's the last time this even happened? Because only having 100 pulls for the last boss puts you all the way back into Xavius category. Up to this point, the biggest blunder in modern WoW was the last boss of Emerald Nightmare. In fact, the whole of Emerald Nightmare was a joke, but it was particularly, visible that the last boss only took 20 wipes. Literally one night, half a night to kill the last boss of the tier. Now, obviously, Gallywix didn't take 20 wipes, it took 100, but even with just 100 wipes, it becomes now, on the record, the second easiest last boss since, at the very least, Warlords of Draenor. That's how easy it was. Now, it did happen before, it's not that unlikely to have one boss to be harder than the last boss of the raid tier. After all, just not this last raid tier in Arbar Palace, but the one before, in Amir Josil, you had Tindral. Tindral required more wipes and was overall more difficult than Farak was. And you can also go further back to something like Castelnatria. Infamously, actually, even before that, Sludgefist was already more pulls than the Natrius. But of course, then you had the infamous Stone Legion Generals, which took not 2 more wipes, not even 20, twice more wipes, more than twice more wipes than the Natrius, because it was 143 wipes for the Natrius versus 292 for Stone Legion Generals. So it's not that unlikely sometimes here and there to see generally the second to last boss, the penultimate boss, being harder than the last boss. It has happened sometimes here and there. However, to consistently see 3 different bosses all harder than the last boss is worthy of today's attire for this video, because it is very underclimactic, it's very unrewarding. I'm also sure, for many reasons, it's not that the top guilds are too happy about this. Getting to the last boss lets you milk the race for longer, lets you get more and more viewers, builds up the hype, the viewership around the race. So blasting the boss in less than 5 hours in a situation that was so surreal, even the dear leader of Liquid Maximum wasn't even sure this was happening. It was like, we have 2 people dead, sub 20%, we haven't even gotten here yet, just play it out, see what happens. That's how surprising that was. So we have to point out with this video how off we were in our initial prediction of positively thinking about this raid being one of the harder ones, purely based on the very early results of Styx and Sprocketmonger, which, by the way, even now, yes, we are fully memeing on this last boss, but even now, at this very second, let's refresh the page, see if there are any updates. I mean, it's Sunday afternoon, I doubt it, but no, there are no updates at the moment. There are only 19 guilds defeating Styx and a grand total of 7 guilds defeating Sprocketmonger. So, 4th and 5th boss of the raid. about 1.5 more than 1.5 weeks into the tier. So it's still quite challenging up to this point, but overall the ease of the last boss will be quite a buzzkill for many players, especially the ones hoping for some cool head-to-head last-minute super tight race. That's definitely not happening this tier. Some might also start fearing about what will happen next tier, because of course the pendulum might swing. We went for a quite disappointing and too easy boss. Now maybe we might have an absolute monster of a last boss in the last tier of the expansion. You know, people were making fun of the fact that Styx was so hard this tier because the 4th boss wall of Nerobar Palace was supposed to be Rashanan and ended up being a joke. So Blizzard got really hurt by that and ended up making Styx as a result. Let's see if they will do the same next year for the last boss after Gallywix was so undertuned this raid. Overall, perhaps the perception might have been drastically different if Gallywix ended up being your average 300 wipes boss at the very end. It would have pushed the total wipes in the raid to be 750, and with 750 it would have been the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th harder raid tier of the past 18 practically. But now though, with this finish, Gallywix fully deserves clown status for how bafflingly simple it was, almost undertuned. It felt like some mechanics were missing. It felt like this was like a good training wheel routine, maybe even for heroic actually, more so than being an actual mythic raid end boss. But definitely missed the mark completely on the last boss of the tier, not on the raid as a whole. We have just seen the raid as a whole is decently tough, well spread in difficulty across at least 4 different bosses. So that's not actually too bad, it's just that the last boss being weak always sours the mood a little bit. For today, we had to make a clown of ourselves for thinking this might have been one of the harder tiers ever, because it definitely was not. This was a deserved ridicule for today on this Sunday. We are now though leaving each other for today, starting of course by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with of course everyone else who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, no, I always knew this clown getup would come in handy one day. You know, once every few years I should have a completely wrong take, and this was the day.